Let's get it going. Just a little bit of background on what we want to accomplish today and why we do this. Cerius, we provide a lot of thought leadership as part of what we do. And I would say, given the rate of change and the talent-driven nature of the workforce of the future, we've seen an increased trend in companies needing to level up their human capital capabilities. We're seeing more requests. It used to be that the only fractional role in a company was the CFO. I would say that a fractional CHRO is probably one of the second highest ones that we're seeing out there in the marketplace as I pull companies and I say, how many fractional or interim executives do you have? That reliance on top level HR leaders is resulting in HR being one of the fastest evolving areas of the company. We want to make it easy for you to stay up to date on the latest changes, the trends, really the support that CEOs need from their HR leadership. In fact, we've got a webinar coming up in a few months where we're going to have a couple of CEOs really give their take on what support do they need from their HR leaders. Because it seems as though what was compliant and relevant on Tuesday is not compliant and relevant on Thursday. To accomplish this, last year we created the Cerius HR series. We've got some incredible HR leaders from organizations small and large who join these sessions. It's really meant to be a think tank. Many of our participants are well-versed in today's topic. It's going to provide a lot of opportunity for mind share, so please do utilize the chat feature. We like to focus on sharing frameworks and tools that you can take your knowledge base and apply even more to deepen your knowledge and understanding to be able to duplicate it in the organizations you work with. So some of the organizational trends that we're seeing right now is that it really is a talent-driven environment. Businesses are needing to adjust to the talent, not the other way around. It's very outcome-based. It's cross-functional versus multi-layered silos. It's about being accountable for outcomes rather than task completion. That's a very big distinction on how we've organized our talent in the past versus how we'll need to organize in the future. Advancement in career pathing. I'm excited to get to this part of the topic today because it's no longer a ladder, it's a lattice. It's no longer about getting and processing data and information, it's about interpreting it and applying it. And that speed of change that we're up against right now, we want to be able to leverage it, and we're needing our business structures and our talent to be flexible and agile, with an emphasis on the ability to develop skills, some of which Clark will talk about. But at the end of the day, people are at the core of business. And if you can't get the right people the company needs and keep them, nothing else matters. So in this month's session, we're going to explore kind of some framework for solving hiring and retention challenges, along with some real world, we've put it to the test. We've got one of our interim CHROs, Clark Ingram, discussing his life's work, and really his passion for reducing employee turnover. I know, Clark, you've worked in a number of verticals and workforces, and one of the things I've learned about you is how strongly you believe that you've got to address turnover as the first step to workforce stability and then organizational growth. Clark is a thought leader working with companies to reduce unwanted turnover, chronically open positions. You're more than welcome, and I strongly encourage you to reach out to him. His LinkedIn is in the chat. And I'd say, Clark, I don't know whether you coined this or I coined it for you, but you're really an employee whisperer.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it may have come out the session that we did, I think it was March of last year. No, it was fall of 2023. Gosh, 18 months ago. And I have a quote from you. It says, culture eats strategy for lunch. And you said employee turnover eats culture for breakfast.
Right.
And since the two most expensive activities that a company can engage in is client acquisition and employee turnover, I can see why you made this statement. I want to turn it over to you I know that there's hundreds of activities that go into reducing turnover, but from all of your experiences, I know you've solved this in a number of organizations and have narrowed it down to a couple of key items that you've got to get in place and aligned first.
The first thing is the employer brand, and every company I've ever walked into, generally, if I would ask them, "What is your employer brand? Why do people come work for you? Why would they rather work for you than somebody else?" Almost never can they actually articulate that, or they articulate something that's really not sellable to candidates. And so the first thing you have to do is literally what I do in my process is I go around and I ask people, what are the 3 to 5 reasons why you work here? And it's amazing how very quickly we can get down to what those things actually are. And 9 out of 10 times, the majority of the people are all coming up with the same answers. So that's the first thing you have to do is find out what makes this employer special. And then the second thing is everything that I do is organizational specific. And with all due respect to HR people, in my humble opinion, a lot of HR things that are done are cookie cutter operations and cookie cutter processes. They're not making it specific to that organization, and they are not taking into account who that organization is. And then the last thing, once you get past those issues and you're able to hold on to people, you're able to recruit the better people, then the next thing is retaining those people and developing them into the employees, not that you hired them for, but rather the positions that they're going to grow into.
Chat's open. I'd love to kind of crowdsource here. These are the first top things when you look at hundreds of things that can be addressed that Clark really goes in and works on initially. What tends to be from those who have joined us, what do you focus on? Because everyone does it in a different way. They've had different successes. Love to, what are maybe the top 1 or 2 things that you know to be, if I start working on this first, and it's pretty universal in most organizations, I really get a lot of traction. Uh, Clark, I'm curious because employer brand, it's something, as you were saying, what makes you special? It really struck out to me going, well, it's the same thing that we do with our customers and marketing. And that's where we spend so much of our time saying, what's your unique selling proposition? What's your value proposition? You're saying, really, anything you're doing with customers, you got to do with your employees.
The employer brand, what it's really boiling down to is that I worked in a company in a town one time where all the plumbing companies, whether they were commercial or residential, were all just lined up on this one street. So if you were a plumber, you could get a job just walking really one building next to the next one. But the issue was each one of them had their own little niche. They were either doing commercial or they were doing residential. They were either doing large projects or they were just fixing faucets and stuff. And the issue being is if you don't let that plumber know, okay, if you're a commercial, big project kind of guy, you're who we're looking for. If you're a residential guy, we really are not looking for you. But and also let people know that ahead of time. Go to any careers page, and almost always, if you look at it and they've got a corporate fluff of just, oh, our greatest asset is our employees and that kind of stuff. No, what you want to do is you want to tell them who to go to work for. For instance, I have friends who work for Exxon. I would never work for Exxon. They're one of the largest corporate bureaucracies in the world, and it's just not who I am. And that's what you want to do. You want to help them decide whether or not they want to come work.
Tim gives a good question. He said, what percentage of companies and HR leaders are truly focused on the definition of employee development that you've described?
Virtually none of them. They might address 1 or maybe 2 of the issues, but what you're really looking for is more like 3 to 5 of who you are and what you're trying to do, where are you going, what's your journey, all that kind of thing.
It's interesting. A lot of the comments here, Taylor, I love you picked up on the selection process where you're looking for and interviewing for common qualities that align with the brand and core values. I saw another comment here from Rocky on top leadership needs to be aligned with the employer brand. Another comment in here about alignment with the core values, and I think you really hit it on. And the question too, we've got to define it and describe it, and everyone know about it first. And I
Right.
love, we'll go into that a little bit more as we talk about the case study and some ways that you went about that with our case study conversation. But I know before we get there, and especially when we're brought in on an interim basis, it seems like there's more challenges than solutions often. And that's kind of what an interim is brought in is there is a problem statement. We are having this problem. And when it comes to turnover, um, feels like turnover is sometimes the symptom and not the actual problem. And you start to pile up. I'd love to give you a little bit of background and let's set the stage for some of the key challenges that do affect higher than normal turnover as compared to competitors.
Whether you're talking about on a corporate level or on a consulting level, you look at the key challenges here that we've come up with, and almost always every one of these exists. Now, just a matter of on that particular organization, how big was that particular issue, and et cetera. I've been in some situations where the location was just in a we were in a bad spot. We were out in the middle of nowhere. But at the very same time, you can also be in downtown Houston, Texas. That's also a location limitation because you've got so many people competing for those same employees with you. And so that can be a real problem. And then the other thing that we all know, we're all very familiar with, is what kind of skills that are actually available out there. Every company I have ever worked with, they've always had that list of jobs where the demand for people were greatly way over the supply that had that particular skill. Whether you're talking about a welder or a nurse or a truck driver or whatever.
So, and I see a number of questions. You really hit on a topic here, Clark. I see a number of questions in here on alignment on brand and how did you establish that? What happens? How do you align your candidates in the screening process to the corporate brand when the ATS is doing the screening? Why don't we jump into the case study? And really, most of the time going forward, we're going to spend it rather than on theory and what should be done or could be done. I've asked Clark to put together a single company case study that is kind of a collection of the last couple of interim assignments that he's done. So he'll keep referring to this company. This company is really a collection or an amalgamation of it. To really dig in and speak to here was the reality, here was the pain, here were the struggles, and here's what we implemented. I think we'll address some of the questions and some of the points that are in the chat. And I'll do my best, Clark, as it comes up to jump in. Take us through from turnover to triumph. I know how much fun we've had with this.
Back to the thing that we were talking about just a moment ago and talking about working for different companies and everything. And the very first time I got thrown into HR was I was in the finance department. I had a bachelor's degree in finance, and that's just the way I think. And we were having the three big problems. We had lots of turnover. We were having a hard time recruiting, and we were having a hard time keeping people and everything. And what I have found over the years is almost always when I go in, they ask me, well, are you a paramedic or are you an engineer or are you this, are you a welder or whatever? And immediately they say, and I would say, well, no, I'm not. Well, very next thing they would tell me is, well, you can't help us. And so it's almost always I had to go to them and say, okay, well, just why don't you give me a little bit of time and let's see how we do. And I have worked in innumerable vertical industries, and what I have found is that there are certain things that are just true in every industry. And it's more a matter of what's going on in that particular organization. And even more important than that, that is what are the actual root causes. And every time I've walked into a company, the very first thing I'm told is that we don't pay our people enough money, and that's why they're leaving. And what I have found over my 37 years now of being in HR is people don't leave for money. They do a little bit at the bottom end, but as you move your way through your career and everything, very quickly people do they end up with more money because they went and started looking for jobs and they were able to find a job where they got more money. But the real issue was that they were leaving the company, they were leaving their manager, they were leaving the culture, whatever. But that's the kind of reasons why I've always found it. Money's always like a secondary thing. But again, let's go down to key issues of what I basically find every single time. As we've already talked about, no discernible employer brand. Why does somebody want to come? Why should they want to come work for you? What is, I already said I wouldn't work for Exxon. I also would never go work for a governmental entity. I'm just not into the bureaucracy thing. Every time I've walked in, they've had high turnover, anywhere between 40% and 80%, just ridiculous in some cases. My goal is always my bottom line is to at least have a reduction in turnover of 30% of their ongoing turnover basically in the first year. And you give me 2 or 3 years, and we'll get that thing under half of what they had. And a lot of times, it's just a matter of figuring out what's the actual root causes. Secondly, I've always found is that two things about recruiting is number one is most companies are trying to recruit themselves out of a turnover problem. So all you're doing is you're hiring more and more people and throwing them right into the same toxic culture and everything that you already have. And so again, the first thing to do is to figure out what are those root causes and do something about that first, which automatically will do something about your recruiting. It makes it a lot easier. The second thing is that I've always found a lot of companies are just not real good at recruiting. They're pretty good at recruiting warm bodies. They're pretty good at bringing people on board, but they're not really good at setting that new standard of person. Every time I would lose somebody in my department, I would always want to go up a level or two in that person. Online company pages and ratings not managed. One of the things I've been a really big believer in Indeed. What I have found with the younger generations is they won't even apply for a job unless they go out and they've looked at the Indeed company reviews. And what I have found is if you're not over 4.0, chances are that 4 out of 5, they won't even apply for the job. And so what I do is I get the companies, I find the good employees who do like it there, and I get them to put reviews up so that we can kick that up. Again, I've been doing that for 30 years or so, and it always works. It's like a Yelp restaurant review. You're standing across the street, you're looking at two restaurants, and one's a 3.0 and one's a 4.5. Which one are you going to go to? Okay, same situation here. You're looking for that 4.5. And then the other thing is just managing, again, getting your employer brand on there so that they can read that, making sure your jobs are right, and making sure the money is right. A lot of times what Indeed does is they will take the reviews that they have and they will assign wages to those jobs, whether it's actually appropriate or not. Well, now they have a thing where you can actually go in there and tell them, no, our pay range for that job is this. And then your key selling points. Are you that company where you're paying, the highest rate out there and you have no benefits? Or are you that company that you're trying to balance off both pay and benefits? Or are you like a lot of governmental entities, they'll pay less money, but they'll pay really good benefits and they'll have pension plans and all that kind of thing. But it's really important to have that out there. The next thing I've always run into is that when I'm generally there, they're on that recruiting treadmill and they're just hiring. I had a company one time that I worked with that literally they would hire the first 12 people. They had 10 jobs, they'd hire 12 people. And the reason they would do that is because generally two or three of them wouldn't be able to pass the drug test. They wouldn't interview them. They would do nothing. And they would just hire the first 10 people in line. That's just not the way to do it. And then the other thing is HR so many times, I've heard this over the years, is that they're the human roadblock or they're the growth resistance, they're the no people, etc. And HR has got to get past that. We've got to be the people that are coming up with the solutions to the operations people. I can't tell you a number of operations people have told me that they just HR just is not helpful. So let's move on. When I first come in, what I do is I have a huge spreadsheet. Again, I'm a finance guy, so I'm really big into spreadsheets, and I just have one question after another, and a lot of times there's many of the questions that are just not applicable to that company, okay, or that place or that industry or whatever. But I just have it overall. And what I do is I take that spreadsheet and I'm just asking lots and lots of questions. And I'm doing my best to listen to them and uh, what is going on in that. And especially the biggest opportunities to move the needle, the low hanging fruit. What are those easy things that you can do? Is and again, a lot of it is the very first thing is doing the employer brand. But I have been in situations where I, I within a few within a 10 days or so, or maybe 2 weeks, I've got a whole plan now. Here's my priorities. This is what I'm doing, and I'm taking it to upper management for them to to approve, to edit, ask questions, etc. And in every case, I've either worked for the COO or the CEO. And a lot of times, even when I worked for the CEO, I actually was doing most of my work for the COO. And we're just trying to figure out how do we make these things. Um, Potential roadblocks. Well, there's just a zillion of them. And the potential roadblocks are number one, it could be almost always organizational specific. It also could be industry specific. Like for instance, I know of one of my clients where 60% of their people had to be certified in what they did. They either had to be that, and a lot of times they were in a situation where you had the basic welders and then you had all these other welders with all these other different certificates and everything. And so you had, and as you guys know, welders are real hard to come by right now. And so the roadblocks too is also just where the company is. The company's in a problem and there's no way out of it, etc. And a story that I try to tell people, I tell people a lot, is one time in the first company I worked with, we were making some progress and we were moving along, and I had one of my fellow employees walk up to me and in a hushed tone, she said, "Clark, it's getting better." It's almost like she didn't want to jinx the company, but she literally could see that things were getting better. And when that's really, again, back to the biggest opportunities to move the needle as quickly as possible, because people will pick up on that. The two things that I try to do as quickly as possible is number one, get staffed up as quickly as I can. But I'm not just hiring as a bunch of people. I'm figuring out who the people are that fit this company and are going to stick with us. So I could go on and literally.
I, one thing I want to hit on here in that prioritization, I know one of your assignments after you had your list of questions, and I love that you're able to have that list of very specific questions because you only work within your solution set. and you
Right.
know what the challenges are, you know exactly what to go after. You then come up with a list of here's everything that we need to implement. And you've got one assignment where it was a list of, let's say, 65, and you needed buy-in. As you were, what did that look like in presenting that to the board? I saw a couple of comments here on leadership buy-in. The leadership needs to be involved. Rocky made a point of, and to your COO, you're answering to them is, are you putting numbers to, here's the impact if we work on it at this point, or is this a little early for that? Just want to understand the mindset, because I think that's where most of us get that pushback of, we all know what to fix. How do we actually get the opportunity to fix it?
You need to be able to tell people this is where we are. Okay. And for instance, is part of your problem you're just not getting resumes? Or are you getting tons and tons of resumes from people that are completely unqualified to do that particular job or that kind of thing? But you need to start off with very simple things. How many resumes are you getting in for any particular job? How quickly are you filling jobs right now? How many people are coming and they're looking at your job, but they're not applying? All of that kind of thing. So you're telling the leadership. And one of the things I have found, again, because of my still recovering from being a financial guy, what I have found from upper management, it's all about numbers. Now that's what they live on. And so you've got to show them, okay, here's where we're at, and here's the goal that we're moving toward. And it's gonna take this long to do these different things, and we should be seeing this is the kind of reactions we should be seeing, where all of a sudden now we're instead of picking up 20% of the people who viewed the job, now we're picking up 80% of the job of the people that are viewing that job. And that's how the quickest way to get a CEO to buy into something is to show him that you can talk numbers too.
Perfect. And I know that we're going to go into some of those metrics that you like to look at later on. But the point is, you do benchmark initially and say, here's where we're at, here's where we need to get to. So
Right.
looking at all of these, what did you do next in the case study?
In each case, I've always started off with, after I've talked to a lot of people in the company, I draft up what I think would be a good employer brand. And I've got to tell you that I have done pretty well on that overall over the years of people reading that and going, yeah, that's us. That's who we are. I've worked for a company one time that ended up being a very large company. I mean, literally 1.5 billion in revenue, and they started with just a bunch of guys in Houston, Texas. And what it boiled down to is what their employer brand was, that we work in refineries and chemical plants, and we are vehemently anti-union. So if you're an anti-union guy, then come work for us, and etc. Again, as quickly as possible, cut your turnover and show that. And it's funny is employee turnover feeds on itself. And it doesn't matter whether you're going up or you're going down, it feeds on itself. The more that you can tell people that, hey, our turnover has been cut by a third or by half or something like that, then all of a sudden you're changing their view of the company. Now all of a sudden they're looking at who they are now, not who they were before. Um, One of the things, one of the roadblocks every time is just getting HR and the hiring managers on the same page. This is who we're looking for. This is the certifications they need. This is the amount of experience, and also getting with hiring managers and getting a real wish list of what they're looking for. I In the past, there's a lot of hiring managers. They're looking for Superman. Okay, and you can look for Superman for a long time. So let's figure out what are the top 3 to 5 things that we're looking for in that job. Online rankings increasing and being managed. Again, it's that feeds on itself because now all of a sudden people can sit there and say, "Oh, I was the one to put that review up, and it's getting all these views and blah blah blah." Almost every single time I've walked into a new company, and I mean, we're literally talking dozens here, is their compensation and benefits have been basically a black hole. Nobody really understood how do I get a raise? What how do I get that promotion? How much do our benefits cost? How much of it I'm paying for? All of that kind of thing. And then hiring to fill a need, not a seat. And it's amazing how many times, and this is something again that I see in most organizations that they're not good at, is you might have a resume that they've applied for a particular job, but looking at the resume, it's very obvious that this person is not qualified for the job they applied, but they're like the perfect person for this whole other job over here that they may not have even known anything about, or something that you don't even have up on your job board that is coming and everything. So again, look for those skills. And as I said a little bit earlier, HR has a very bad connotation of being a roadblock, people who are not looking to be the problem solver. Finance people, on the other hand, that's all we're all about. We want to figure out what the problem is. We want to figure out the most efficient way to fix it and the quickest way to fix it. And so, again, when you start doing all of those things, 10% better, 20% better, 50% better, everything gets better and it starts feeding on itself.
And Clark, there's a couple of comments and questions in the chat that I want to point out. I think your question on when Clark, you walk in, or when we place interim CHROs, how equipped or under-equipped is the existing HR person? And I don't know if I don't know that we've had a situation where there was an HR person or there was someone who knew what to do. They just didn't know how to fix it. In all cases, they didn't even know what to do.
I'll go back to what I said a moment ago about if you show them a plan and again, finance people, you show us a problem, we'll come up with a plan. And now, obviously, as we all know, the moment you get into the battlefield, the plan's going to have to change. But at the same time, you show them a plan, you start making progress, and you start getting to the point. In every case, I'm one of those people that I'm saving them. I'm not saving them 10,000 here, 20,000 there. I'm saving them literally millions. Okay, if you take a relatively good sized company and you cut their turnover by 50%, you're talking big money. And what I've always found and what I've always done is I've always had an agreement with my CFO that when I hand you money, 10% of that goes into my little honeypot that I can use for HR however I want to. And I have never had a CFO complain about that because here I am, I'm handing him $1 million and all I want is 10% back. Now I can hire that person that I need to move on to the next thing.
And there's a couple of comments in here, and I love the discussion around. We know that it starts with the employer brand and the core values, and we need to hire to align to that. But there's this thing in the middle called an ATS often. I know in some of your recent assignments, there wasn't an ATS screening, it was people screening, and that's where no one was even screening the resumes. But in a lot of companies, especially as they're trying to implement AI into the applicant screening process. I've seen a number of our clients actually use things like predictive index. They've got so many feeds that are pulling into it that they are able to use even a basic ATS to be able to sift out who may or may not align to the brand who may or may not align to the core values, or the basic problem solving skills that they need or agility that they need through a number of questions. Obviously, AI is in ATS and recruiting. That is the largest area of AI being implemented within HR. But there's still, you may not be screening for it with the ATS, but you certainly can screen for it after that. I know we've been looking at that as part of ours, and there is a limitation. There's absolutely 100% a limitation, and that's why it is a people business, and you're still going to need people no matter how good that software is. Michael, I see your comment, AT is screening out the good people. That's where technology can only go so far. Um, Figuring out what is the screening process. I've had one client who actually manually screened initially, looking for certain things, and then they used some AI and analytics. But most companies that I know right now who are trying to use AI as part of their process to screen for things like core values or screen for an understanding or to match applicants to a problem statement, the feedback we're getting is the human is still better. So AI is great. I'd say humans are still the core part of HR. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox there. I see it's quite a discussion. I think we may end up doing just a webinar on that and bring together some experts because I can see it's quite hot. And Clark, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Kind of look at once you got everything in place, and this was probably, I think in most cases, 9 to 12 months. What we're seeing on screen is what you put in place, the impact that those made. Um, how are you measuring some of that, or what was next? Because you're never just stopping there.
The big questions for me is number one, what's the percentage are we staffed up? I want to be in the I want to be in the mid 90s. You're never going to get much past that. But at the same time, you're trying to get staffed up, but you're also trying to drive the turnover down. Okay. And so let's go on to this. I tell you what, since everybody's bringing this up about, I'll go ahead and get on my soapbox for a minute. The really, really big companies, I'm talking about the multi-billion-dollar companies, yes, they don't have people looking at resumes. They are screening off and they're getting down to a number. Okay. And that's just the way it is. The smaller companies, on the other hand, most of them are still doing it the old way. I'm a really big believer in basically questions being asked at the time you apply. You know, are you, for instance, are you a certified welder? Are you a certified truck driver? Do you have your CDL? Whatever, to get it down to where they have to say yes or no. And if they say, no, I don't have my CDL, then this is a CDL job. And if you don't have it, we don't even need to talk about it. And it's amazing to me, and most of the companies that I work for, they've got a high percentage of their people that are either licensed or certified or something. Okay. So let's talk about and unfortunately, you got to play the game. And as we all know, the best way to play the game is networking and knowing people and all of that kind of thing, where you're getting out of that whole loop. So well-crafted employer brand feedback loop. Again, you're going back to all the way from the CEO all the way down to that cafeteria worker and asking them, take a look at this and tell me what you think about it. And we got to a point pretty quickly, most of the time that I've gone in there, where we weren't wordsmithing it because we'd gotten it down to those two or three things that identified who they were. Another big thing that I look at a lot, and I'm one of, the CFO. You go into a senior leadership team meeting, you got the CFO up there and he's doing his thing, right? I want to be able, as an HR guy, I want to be able to have my metrics up there too and show him, okay, showing where we were and where we're going. And for instance, the number of percentage voluntary. I want to drive that down as quickly as possible. I want to give them, especially if they fit what we're looking for, versus the involuntary. And the involuntary, almost always, it's in the first 90 days that they're there, and it's generally because we're not doing a good job of selecting the right people. The other thing I would tell you that I have found is amazing is the number of retirement people that are retiring, because we've gotten past COVID and all that kind of thing. They've worked a couple of years and they're just to that point. Candidate life cycle. How many resumes do we have sitting in our system right now that we haven't even touched? Either I want the hiring manager to look at that, or I want HR to be looking at. Another thing that I call in play, and that is how many resumes have either HR or the hiring manager identified that they're a potential candidate, a real candidate that we want to talk to, et cetera. How many of them are being set up for interviews? How many being interviewed, et cetera, et cetera? How many have been hired and now they're just going through the process, et cetera. Next thing I want to drive down is the number of open positions. Most of the time when I go work for somebody, the number of their open positions generally get cut in half, roughly. And there's unfortunately there's lots of ways in HR that you can count how many open positions you actually have. I want to be able to show that my metrics that comparing. I want to compare my metrics of my Indeed company review versus my competitors that are around me, the people that I have selected. Am I beating them? Just straight up, am I beating them? Because this is a marketing game. Okay, recruiting is nothing but marketing for people. And then how much consistency, the message that you've come up with that employer brand, how many different places can you put out there somewhere that your message that people are seeing? And then the other thing is total rewards. Are they competitive? And are they being transparently shown to the employees? Okay. You can't sit there and say that you're the highest paid people when you're looking at one of your competitors. You know how much they're paying, and you simply are not. So there's lots of ways to benchmark that, and a lot of times, just about every time I go in, the HR department is doing little to measure all of those things, and most importantly, communicate that up to the upper management and also communicate that to the employees. Where I always want to get to, and I always tell people this story, way back in Houston, Texas, on the Ship Channel, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the Houston Ship Channel, there's lots and lots of refineries, and there's a bar on that, and the only people going to that bar is the technicians out of the plants and our contractor technicians. And if you want your message out and you've got a really good message and your employees are happy with you, that's how we ended up picking up a lot of people, because they were just telling the guy, people would be griping about their company, and my guys would sit there and go, the last 2 years, we're on a roll. Things are just getting better and better at my company. And that's how we ended up getting a lot of really good people.
Clark, I know you've got a lot to cover. One question Ed put out there is if you are using regrettable versus non-regrettable turnover to assess the number of folks who are voluntarily leaving and leave a big hole. Maybe not all voluntary leaves are created equal, and some leave a bigger impact. How would you address that?
Where are they going? Are they going across the street to your competitor? Or I had a situation just recently where I was talking to an employee that was leaving, and they were leaving the industry. They were they had decided that they were not happy with the industry that we were in, and they just went to a completely different industry. That's what I really want to hear. What just kills me is when I have employees that they're going to work for another company And I'm sitting there going, that company is nowhere near as good as us. And a lot of times they're being bought by that hourly rate. And it's amazing how many times when they have uh, they go, and then all of a sudden they get there and they find out, oh my God, I've been taking the company for granted on the following things.
So what I'm hearing is you're less focused on the objective numerical and more on the subjective, which Ed adds in
Right.
finding that out during stay interviews versus once that happens is one way of doing that. Now I know once you've got everything stable, you've got employees, we're not spinning our wheels recruiting after recruiting. Two of the things that you put in place is the value pathing and the employee development, which I know could be a whole separate topic, but with the time we've got left, I'd really like to hit on these and how you approach them, because there is a big feedback loop between the development and the value pathing and some of what you set up during the recruitment process.
In every company I've ever worked for, they've had these people that were going through training and they learned 80% of their knowledge within 2 to 3 years. And the problem is that the compensation did not match up with their value going up. And that's why I call it value pathing, is that you are building a path where you are rewarding them as they're increasing their value. They're doing the training, they're doing exactly what you want them to do, and you need to reward them for that. And the problem is that a lot of companies don't do that, and that's why they end up with um, a lot of turnover. Skill mapping, again, when you go into an organization, you got to figure out, okay, how many of of one particular position do you need? How many do you need? Do you even need other things that you might have seen in other areas? But you have to figure out what what are the skills that are absolutely necessary for that organization to work. And then the other thing, I'm a big believer that people are always want to go on a journey. They don't just want to get a job and then they have to go to another job and all that. What they want to do is they want you to see them, okay, where do you that classic question, where are you going to be 5 years from now? I want to be able to tell them that. And a lot of times in the jobs that I have, they're starting out at a relatively low rate. And if they do what we tell them to do within 3 to 5 years, they're making a very livable wage. And then development planning. A lot of companies do a very good job of training. They have their training programs in place, but what they don't do is that next step of rewarding the employees in lots of different ways, not just in money, but you plan that development out where they see it. They see it as a path that they're on, and they're going to do step one. And one of the things I tell a lot of people is the idea that show them the rewards for what they're doing. And then what you end up with is those guys at the top of the heap that have finished it now telling the younger guys, yeah, just do what they're telling you to do.
So getting into skill mapping a little bit, what are some of the keys that you put in? Because I've been brought into worked with a number of different clients, and they want this, but not realizing what it takes in the infrastructure to put in place. So what are the keys that you put in place in order to get movement on it?
Again, if the training is already in place, which generally it is, that the thing that you have to do is you have to build that path where they see the actual benefits as they're moving along. Again, aligning value with compensation. And then the next thing is that one of the things that we did in one of the companies a long time ago is cross training, where we had a technician that ended up where he's now certified in 3 different service lines. So when that phone rings, the chances that he can work on that particular job goes up quite a bit. But you have to figure out what are those skills. And what we got to was they could not have more than about 3 service lines before they would just kind of strip themselves out.
Interesting. And who really owns that skill mapping or coming up with those skills? Because that's where I've seen the friction in most companies is it the operating individual, the department, the hiring manager, or is it HR? How do you get the two working together?
It'd be a combination of training, operations, and HR working together and figuring out how, for instance, in one of the things that we did was we just mapped it out on how much Exxon was paying us for a guy as he got trained up and how much more. And then we just paid him the appropriate amount from there.
Awesome. So career and value pathing. I know this is one of the things you get so excited about is we've got to pay to what the value to the organization is.
Right. Again, what I've found in most companies, they don't have a value path. They're expecting the people to just train themselves up. This whole idea that a lot of us grew up in is, oh, stick around for 5 years and something good will happen. That's not going to work with the younger people. They want to see that path. Demand a higher standard. Every single time that you lose somebody, you want to get a better, even better person. Compensation is almost always linear, and it's not. The reality is, think about any job you've ever had where you started off with not knowing much and you learned a whole lot in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Then the compensation can't be linear. It has to be up to match up with the value. And what I have found, and matter of fact, it happened just recent in my most recent company, is they're just now figuring out that, hey, this really does work, and this is the reality of the value that they're getting as they do the training.
And then there's the skills train. There's two different parts of the training, development training. You've got the skills, which is those hard skills, and we've talked about some of those um, in aligning those two. But there's also the management training. This is where we've seen from the over hiring and over promoting during COVID. This right here is probably the number one pain point that we've seen in organizations.
Operations people, department managers, location managers are always really good at operating the company that they're managing. However, most of them have never been trained into anything in regard to soft skills, management, communication techniques, and all of that kind of thing. And most companies do not have that.
And it's interesting what we've seen is what they're doing is identifying individuals who may not even want to be managers and manage other people, but they want them to be able to lead and understand other perspectives, and they're more effective in team environments when they've gone through some type of management or leadership training. So it's almost like the whole organization is now understanding and going through it as we get to more of a lattice versus a ladder.
Right.
I know we've been through a lot. We've gone through a lot, and I've been watching the chat. I think that we've got as much information as the chat as we've probably had on the slides. And I think that's the power of the HR and senior HR community. And the more that we know what to be talking about, who we should be talking about it with, and being able to make an impact in organizations who know that they need this type of expertise. I think, Clark, how would you summarize a lot of what you do as you step into as an interim CHRO and address first the turnover, followed by the career pathing and development?
Right. Number one is you have to customize what you're doing to each of the organizations. It's not a cookie cutter. Secondly, build a process and refine it down because a lot of the issues can be solved by process. I'm a real big believer in continual improvement. And it works the manufacturing people, but if you just apply those standards and those concepts to HR, it works out really well. Understand the strength and the weaknesses of your organization. What are the good and bad that you're dealing with? I'm a big believer in teams, especially in the HR department. Generally, the HR department is huge, and it's within HR you have to be a team but you also have to be a team between HR and the operations managers. The number of operations managers that I have heard complain about operations managers complaining about HR is just infinite. And again, we have to be the solutions. We can't just say no to everything. We have to help them come to their solution.
All right. Thank you. And I think that's where we see is those partnerships. That's what moves the needle, not one person. I think I remember seeing superhero Superman. One interim is not the superhero, the Superman. It's how they can get everyone working together. Clark, thank you. And we've got one more thing here. I think this could be an entire webinar on its own that we're seeing. Rocky says, how challenging is meeting career pathing expectations in the current environment of flattening hierarchy? And that's what we've talked about. It's no longer a ladder, it's a lattice. And we've seen Amazon flattening their organization. We saw, Zappos went to self-managed teams a number of years ago, and we're starting to see a trend in that area. Last minute thoughts on that flattening organization and how to kind of create value and show what that path is, because it's not the typical path.
Yeah, if I can just have a moment, Krista, I want to thank you. We've known each other now for a few years. Thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation, but also for the engagement I'm on right now. And I just appreciate everybody at Cerius and all the different things you guys have done.
Thank you. We'll hold the question for next time then, because it's what Rocky threw out there is just a fascinating topic that have been part of a lot of discussions as people are needing to reorg to meet the workforce of the future. Thank you everyone for joining us. We know there's a lot of ways that you can spend your time. We appreciate that you spent it with us. Please reach out to Clark. I'll also be doing a post to continue the conversation on LinkedIn. And I love the interaction and the input that we had in the chat today. This is how we can move mountains. And let's just continue that on LinkedIn. Have a fantastic rest of your day.